This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 35.
I just think that there has to be this willingness and this understanding that you don't have to be the expert, and that the most powerful learning moments can happen unscripted.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Ken Ehrman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I am here with my co-host, Mr. Matt Absentee Rogers. What's going on, Matt? Yeah, that's kind of what I meant by absentee. He's totally absent. Matt completely skipped out on today's podcast, and I was forced to navigate the entire experience myself. But yeah, Matt seriously isn't here. Everything is okay. Everything is well. He had a family commitment, and we talked about rescheduling. He talked about trying to make it, and the reality is I told him no. Family comes first. And Matt and I have talked about that a lot with different guests, taking care of yourself, sharpening the saw or the axe, we've heard the analogy of. And, you know, I would assume, I've never met a teacher before, but I want you all to remember you have sick days and you have personal days. And it is okay, it's encouraged, and you should be using them. They're given to you for a reason. Missing a day as a teacher is one of the hardest things to do, especially for our younger teachers or our newer teachers into the profession. You feel guilty like you're supposed to be there every day. But the reality is you don't have to be. It is okay to take off. It may be a pain because sub-plans can take forever, and you want to make sure you're giving the students the best experience possible while you're gone. But the reality is, if you have a family commitment, if you want to take a long weekend, if you want to just go have some fun and take a day trip somewhere, whatever the case is, do it. It's okay. It's important for us to do that. And so that's why Matt's not here. He's missing out on the recordings that we're putting together today as we navigate through our summer schedule here. So our interview today is fantastic. We have Abby French. She is from Virginia. She's a secondary social studies teacher, and we really connected. She just creates such an incredible learning experience for her students, and she kicks the podcast off talking about advocacy, talking about how to get more community support, how to educate local officials to support your school district more. And we talk about how every teacher has a role and a part in that. And then we dive into some student-centered learning, inquiry-based learning. She just shares a ton of strategies and a ton of insight on how to do that successfully and how to really tap into student passions and student interests. And she, reflects on her own children and how she saw that as a mom and she brought that into her classroom as a professional. And so regardless of the subject area you teach, the grade level you teach, you're absolutely going to be able to connect with Abby. You're going to be able to pull out a lot of instructional strategies and ideas and some just inspiration and encouragement for what you do on a daily basis. So if you're looking for ways to get your students more actively involved in the classroom, you're looking for ways to be more comfortable with chaos, this is absolutely the show for you to listen to. So as always, thank you for listening. Please make sure that you are subscribing to our podcast on both YouTube and your platform of choice. And please, please, please share this with another teacher. When you gain benefit from it, we want others to benefit from this podcast as well. So without any further delay, let's bring in Abby French. Hi, Abby. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's really nice to be here, Ken. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm super excited to have you with us. So let's just kick things off by officially introducing yourself, where you're from, and just kind of what your teaching journey has looked like in a small snapshot.
Okay. Well, I live in a rural area in Virginia. I live in Woodstock, Virginia, and I teach in a neighboring district, Frederick County. And what that kind of looks like, this is a small kind of, like I said, rural part of Virginia, conservative. There's always some back and forth and tug between local officials and funding every year. We always were advocating for public education and the funding of our schools. So that's part of the landscape of when you teach in this type of an area. But it's also the backdrop to a lot of history, which is what I teach. So, and it's beautiful. The Shenandoah Valley in Virginia is just breathtaking. And so it's, there's a lot, it's a mix of things, but I've spent my teaching career here. And I like to say that I've done it in kind of two sections because I taught right out of college. My mother, we're from this area, and I was not coming back here. And then my mother was like, "I've just put an application in." And I did, and I ended up, the rest is history, so to speak. That's where I've made my adult life as a mother, as a teacher, and I spent the first part of my career, about 6 years, teaching before I started a family. And then I left teaching, and I was just a full-time mom with 4 kids going through the system on that side of things. And continuing to advocate for my own children, but also just, again, public education. And then in 2015, circumstances were such that I wanted to return and kind of redefine my own career. And I came back into teaching, and it's been a remarkable 6 years, especially the last 4. I feel like I finally have my head and heart in terms of education in sync, like what feels right and what I know is right are aligned. And I just have found a passion in student or learner-centered culture and implementing that and helping other people do that as well.
That's amazing. I can relate to you on a couple levels. My wife is a former teacher, and she is now home with our 3 kids,
right,
all under the age of 3.5. So she, she made that same commitment to hopefully temporarily, maybe, who knows, leave teaching, to fill that role is what I will say is by far the hardest job I've ever witnessed in my life.
It is all hands on deck,
being
for
full-time
sure.
mom, and so I think it's great that you were able to come back and go back to the profession that you left when you made that journey. You mentioned teaching history. Specifically, are you middle school, high school, a mix?
So I'm a middle school teacher, and I have always taught. I've taught everything. My first job was as a physical science teacher, 8th grade, my very first job, and then I've taught civics, and I've taught. 1 year I had 2 years I had the opportunity to teach everything to a 5th grade group of students and then loop with them up to 6th grade and do that. That was pretty fabulous. When I came back into teaching, I landed into a U.S. history position at the middle school where I live, and that's what I've been teaching. So I've taught U.S. History 1 in 6th grade, and for the first time this year, I'll be teaching U.S. History 2 in 7th grade.
Very cool, very cool. So you opened a lot of things in your intro that I really want to dive into. So the first thing is you talked about really advocating for public education in your area, both as a teacher and as a parent. What do you feel are the big things that you try to push for, or you try to educate local officials, local community that maybe not be connected to public education because they don't have kids in the system, that you feel are misconceived or just not understood? What are those big things that you feel if you can educate those local officials and constituents, have the biggest impact on really getting them on the side of education. I know in my area, I recently learned in my district, we're like kind of on the border of rural suburban. I mean, we're definitely more suburban, about 45 minutes northwest of Philadelphia, but we're kind of in the middle of where rural kind of starts to happen. But I recently found out that I think it was almost 80% of property owners in our district did not have children in the school district, which was beyond shocking to me. I couldn't believe how high of a percentage it was. So can you just speak to what are those big things that you really think help advocate?
So one of the other roles that I have really had an honor in serving has been as an officer for our local chapter of the Virginia Education Association, which is our union. And so a lot of work, has been done around exactly the thing you're talking about educating constituents, understanding what the maybe the pushback or the arguments are. And so what we really want to make known is the connection between a strong school and children having adequate resources and funding, and having low teacher turnover, having teachers that stay planted, and the consistency, the continuity that comes from that, the strengthening of the whole entire school and community when that happens, the connection between that and strong communities, the connection between strong schools and having businesses want to look at your community to be a part of, and how that connects to housing markets, and how all of those things are really interrelated. Touching back on the teacher retention, the pandemic didn't help this, but when you are in our situation where I live in the Shenandoah Valley, we are a kind of a sleeper community of Northern Virginia. And a lot of people that live here because of very low tax rates commute in to DC or the DC metropolitan area, whether they're in education or in other businesses, and they earn the income there and they live here. And they don't necessarily want those to see a tax increase to fund schools. And we also have a number of elderly people on fixed income in our county. And so in a community where the majority of taxes that fund schools come from property taxes, and you have people on fixed income that don't have children in the schools anymore, we're constantly fighting that kind of reality. And it is tough on people. But to stay competitive, to keep teachers employed here or attract new teachers, it has to be a really intentional kind of thought process.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, like you said, teacher retention is so important to the continuity of the school community, which then obviously has an impact on the larger community. And I will just say the Shenandoah Valley is a beautiful place. We went there a couple of years ago. It's beautiful down there. So when you're doing this, okay, so you say that you're a big advocate for it. What about the teachers that know it's important, that want to support maybe someone that's a little bit more vocal or a little bit more involved like you, but they don't want to be seen as involved? They just want to do their job. They want to help support the school community. They want to help support what they know is important. What are things that they can do inside of their classroom, maybe the use of social media? What are things that teachers can do a better job of to tell their story or to change the narrative around education?
Well, I'm not sure, Ken. I'd like to push back a little bit on the very idea of teachers not being willing to, or not wanting, or not feeling comfortable to maybe speak out or to take more of a own a narrative in it, because I really think that we have to start doing that very thing. And it can be in different capacities. It can be, if you don't like public speaking at a meeting, then write a letter. If you don't like writing letters, put a sign up. Show up to the school board meetings. Show up to your board of supervisors, a local, political group, and elected officials meetings to advocate. Wear red, red for ed, or whatever it is that the thing is. But it's time for solidarity. It's time not to just ride the coattails of other people willing to do the work. It's not comfortable. I don't like it. I freak out every time I go and speak on behalf, or, writing a speech. I agonize over it. It takes a long time. It's not easy. But it's something I think that this is public education. We're talking about public education, and I don't believe it's funded. I think the whole funding structure needs to be revamped, and how we do this. I think that teachers, public educators, should be paid differently, and I don't mean just exorbitant but I mean that a public educator ought to be able to make a living without having a sidekick or a side job, or multiple. And I think that they deserve the best insurance. And, there are a lot of things I think recognition, a lot of things that we can do better to honor the work that's being done and to celebrate it. If you're a teacher that doesn't want to get political, okay, but celebrate what you're doing in your classroom. Make it visible so people know.
Absolutely. I'm glad you pushed back, because I agree with you. I think it's important that we do advocate for ourselves. And, we've had teachers on this podcast that actually specialize in their high school English classes. They teach, her name was Jessica. She teaches an advocacy class for her students to learn how to appropriately, respectfully, in an educated manner, advocate for different causes. And, it's important for us to do the same. And, I think it's really important what you just said in that last note about, share what you're doing, celebrate what you're doing. I use social media, Twitter, for the most part, for education. I have for years, and I'm not a big social media person. I don't spend a lot of time on it, but I try to consistently post things, especially when I was teaching 5th grade and STEM in the classroom. Now as an instructional coach, it's a little bit different, but I tried to consistently just share what I was doing in my classroom, and the really crazy fun things, and also just the very normal basic things that have an impact on student learning. As a 5th grade teacher as well, I adopted a Facebook page purely for my homeroom parents to join and to watch, and I had so many of them thank me because they loved just being able to see pictures. Their parents and the community, they just want to see pictures and videos of kids. And my former principal, he adopted a Facebook page very early as well, and would live stream every assembly and could see people from Arizona and Alaska and all these different states joining and getting emails saying, thank you so much. And Aunt Edna was able to watch the awards assembly from Arizona this morning because he was making it more public for more people to join in. And it can be scary, but at the same time, that positivity has such a great impact on telling that story. And it becomes a lot easier to advocate for needing more funding or for what you're needing when you're seeing the positive things that are out there. I mean, even boiling that down to a classroom teacher asking their principal for $200 for something, if you can show why, or you can show the positive impact you're creating, the principal is going to give you that $200 for whatever you need for your classroom.
Or someone in the community will, community partnerships are so powerful, but people have to know it is truly about communicating.
Yep. Yeah, and the responsibility does fall on us to communicate that in a positive way. So when you transitioned out of your career and then came back in, I have found over the years when I'm able to interact with someone that didn't start an education right out of college and remain in education that entire time, whether they pursued a different career first and they transitioned in, or like you stopped for a portion to be with your family. What perspective or what skills do you think that you fostered in that time outside of education that have a huge impact on you being a more successful teacher now?
Well, I don't think that you have to be a parent or have your own children to be an outstanding, remarkable educator. I don't. But I do know that for me, that my understanding of kids and my role in that and meeting kids' needs and where they were, and what kinds of scenarios they were coming to me with as a teacher changed dramatically, having been a mom, having known personally the chaos of mornings, before kids even get to us in schools, what that can look like at homes. There can be all kinds of upsetting moments before kids even walk into the school building. And so that's just one example. But advocating for my own children, realizing the unique qualities, the unique strengths, and the passions of my own children that were so different from one another, I really think my understanding and appreciation for kids as just being, they're so precious, each single one of them, like their own. And I know that's kind of a corny word to use, but it's really true and so unique. And I have my oldest son who, from the time he was about 8 years old, was just completely mesmerized by filmmaking. And he still is at 22. And my second son and my third son, who are 20 and 19, because I had three at 3 years old too, like you can. They are completely interested in other things, totally different passions and interests. And my second son is interested in finance and real estate and has just bought his first house and is renting it out to 3 other college roommates in Richmond, Virginia. And it's an investment but he's learning as he goes. This is like, he's read his own books. He pushed this for 2 years and did it. And so his whole thing is something completely different than Stephen's and filmmaking. And the third and fourth kid have their own interests completely. And so what I bring into the classroom is this true understanding that, one, as a parent, I wanted every teacher of my children to be able to see them for who they are and to recognize those interests and strengths and to cultivate those things, not just be aware of them, but to actually help develop those things and allow them to be use self-expression and their own talents. And so that's really, when I talk about student-centered learning experiences, that's kind of the well it comes from, because I see my students, this is someone else's kid who also just wants a teacher, the education system, to embrace them for who they are, help develop them for life, not just for U.S. history too, and support them in their journey. And that's really what has transformed for me, the kind of the connection.
That's beautifully said. I mean, I'm already seeing that as a parent. Just the personality of my 3-year-old son and my 1.5-year-old daughter are just complete opposite. And there's so many factors that you could say lend into that, but kids are just different. I remember when I used to work at a summer camp, I had 2 siblings, 2 brothers, again, total opposites. And the mom told me she had 4 kids. She said my oldest and my third, I never got a single call home ever from school. She said my second and my fourth both got a call within the first week of kindergarten. And she said they grew up in the same house, they had the same parents, they're just different. And so involving student interest is something that you hear a lot. It's something that teachers try to do, and I think it's really hard. It's definitely something that I think is very difficult to involve student interest, especially trying to individually recognize those interests, like you said. Do you have any tips or strategies that you use to be able to, one, learn the student interest quickly in the year, and then how you kind of leverage that and involve it throughout the year?
So, I mean, I'm getting ready to open, school in a week with my new seventh graders. And one of the very first things I'm going to do is just have a very, I hope it'll be a comfortable conversation, just a very casual conversation with them about this. This is what it's going to look like in here. I want your interest, your talents, your strengths. I want you to feel not just comfortable in pursuing those things and using those to enhance our learning in this room, but it's expected. I expect you to bring that into part of it. And so I guess there are all kinds of interest surveys and different opening year activities that teachers can do, and a quick Google search will help you find something that's comfortable for you. But one of the easiest ways throughout the year that I like to one of the easiest strategies I like to use is by simply, like, whatever the content learning target is, or whatever the SOL standard that we're learning. I like to present it to the kids, and then and especially with seventh grade, another year older than what I've been teaching. I do this in sixth grade also, but I mean, I like to turn it over to them and say, okay, how do you want to, this is what we have to learn. How are you going to demonstrate that to me? How would you like to? So that if there's a Stephen French, my oldest, out in the classroom, who is absolutely obsessed with filmmaking and screenwriting and special effects and all that stuff, okay, go for it. Make a video, make a short film about this somehow. Just how are you going to demonstrate your learning? If it's writing, if it's music, if it's whatever the thing is, if it's art, how are you going to demonstrate that to me? And I'm wide open with what I would accept. I don't want to make kids cookie cutters of each other, of this some standard that I hold up and say, here it is. This is what I want it to look like when you're done. I want to infuse who they are into it.
That's great. Do you tend to leave it totally open like that? Do you offer some ideas? Because there's always that, and Matt's our
Sure.
co-host who's not here with us has referenced this a couple times. Like, he did one project, I think it was designing a flashlight, something like that, and he showed him example, and I think he used like a Pringles can in his, and he got 25 Pringles cans, maybe different flavors, but he got the same thing.
Right.
And there's always that balance of, like, you kind of want to spark ideas, because they also...
But you also want to provide structure.
Right. And as a seventh grade teacher, they're used to school by the time they get to you. So I also feel like at times when a teacher, like you're saying anything you want, demonstrate it however you want, they fall back into what they've always done with former teachers.
Yeah, no, you're right.
So how do you find that balance of, like, sparking ideas of creativity, but not just giving them choices that they choose?
Well, I think that's a really, really, really valid point. And so in the beginning of the year, I start with some examples. I build skill around, are you familiar with what one-pagers are?
No.
Okay, so a one-pager is this, literally a one-page, like the front of a copy piece of paper, or a piece of copy paper. And you divide it into different, like, sections. So it could be boxes, or it could be like any number of, like, kind of geometric. You divide the page into these sections. Then kids are tasked with answering a number of questions. Let's say it's about the Revolutionary War. You would design your questions that you would want that information displayed on the one pager. And then students have to use a combination of written word and sketches that fill up the entire page, like to the edge of the page. And so there's this, the magic, the science, but behind the writing and the sketching is there about how that sticks. It's like glue in your brain. And so I teach kids that that's one option that they're going to have, that they could always do about a topic. And I teach them how to do it and how to do it well and what that looks like. And so we practice. And we'll do other things exactly like that throughout the year that demonstrate kind of like increasing their repertoire of what they could use to go to. It could be different things like graphic organizers, like a Venn diagram, and then a written paragraph explaining the comparisons. So there are different things that I do throughout the year because I always want to be increasing their skills and helping them develop those things. But I also absolutely want any type of out there kind of thing that they would want to do. And I've had some extraordinary, really extraordinary kinds of projects happen because of that.
That makes sense. I think that's a great approach to kind of build that throughout the year with that scaffolding of ideas of exposing them. They can figure out what they like, what they don't like, what they struggled with, what they didn't struggle with. How do you handle when students, like you said, your son, he loves film. Yeah. You have a student that wants to make a video. I don't know if you're comfortable with using programs like WeVideo or iMovie or those programs, but if you weren't, how do you encourage students to do things that you might not be able to support them in terms of understanding the product or the system or the tool that they're using?
Right, like wanting to do a podcast. I've never facilitated a student-led podcast before, but that's something I desperately want to do, and I'm going to dig in. I'm just going to dig in. And so, teachers, if you're listening to this, I feel your pain. I just think that there has to be this willingness and this understanding that you don't have to be the expert, and that the most powerful learning moments can happen unscripted and by bringing in your instructional coaches and supervisors and tech support people, the IT Cs in your building. Ask for help, but don't be afraid to get started. Be straight up with the kids. I mean, I don't know. I've done WeVideo before and I didn't know anything. I mean, it was just, and we did it. We got through it. And it was really interesting. And the kids learn editing while I'm learning editing. And in fact, they're teaching me most of the time. And so it becomes this culture of partnership, and it's not about it's not teacher led, and it's better that way. I had this incredible project. I guess this will be 3 years ago, but I had students develop theme parks around the geographic regions of the United States. And two of my boys were partnered together, and they came to me and they said, "Miss French, we really want to do it." Oh gosh, what was it? Was it in? I'm trying to remember the name of the the other kind of like the game that they were using, but they wanted to do it in this not Roblox.
Roller Coaster Tycoon.
No. Maybe it was
Minecraft.
Anyway, I think it was Minecraft. Okay, so they wanted to do it in that, and I'm like, well, I don't even know if that's even if our filter at the school system will even allow you to do that. And I don't even. All you have is Chromebooks. That's not even compatible. But okay, let's do it. Let me check into some things. So I went to the principal and I said, "Hey, can they do it?" And he was all about supporting whatever if that's what the kids want to do. If they think they can make this meet your requirements about creating this other theme park and all the things that went with it, he said, "Yeah, let's let them do it. I'll find out about the filter. I talked to the boys. A parent volunteered to drive a TV into the classroom every morning for like 2 weeks. They sat there. They were totally allowed, given permission. They could use their phones to help do this. And they made the most amazing project. And it just was, we didn't have everything worked out. It wasn't seamless. It took a little navigating and creativity to even make that happen, but it was so worth it.
That's amazing.
And you know, the thing is, when you involve kids into projects like that and they are busy trying to get it right for themselves, not for you, not because of a requirement, because they're so engaged, do you realize you don't have classroom management issues? You don't. What you start to see is that you're fostering leadership and kids leading themselves and working and collaborating, and it's not teacher-led or demanded. It happens.
Yeah,
you can stand a little chaos.
I would describe it exactly the same. The feeling in the room is just palpable. It's just, there's nothing like being in a student-like classroom, and when you experience it as a teacher, when you like hit a point where when you just stop and look around and you realize that everyone is leading their own learning or leading their learning collaboratively, there's no better feeling. And it's one of those where you say, I can't ever go back. I have to do this as much as I can. Now, it's not an everyday experience, but I want to create this as often as I possibly can. And then you also see it instantly when you walk in other classrooms. I mean, in a moment's notice, you can tell just the way that I think it's the way that students communicate with each other. Even if I'm and I see it more now as an instructional coach because I get to go into a lot of classrooms, even if it is a teacher-centered lesson that day, because you still have to have those.
Sure.
Just the way the students communicate with each other, you can tell that it is a consistently student-led environment, because the way they communicate with each other is completely different. And when I would have administrators come into my room to observe something, or they're just walking down the hallway, whatever the case was, and they would ask me, what are the kids working on, or what's going on today? I would say, just go talk to the students. And most times the feedback I got was, I can't believe how well your students communicated with me as 10-year-old children. And it's because in that student-centered environment, they're forced to be great communicators because they have to learn to work collaboratively. So,
and they're not repeating back someone else's idea. You know, it's coming from within them, and so it's a totally different feel. And I know as a teacher, on the days that it's all on me to deliver information, which I try, but there are those days. I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted. I'm physically drained. I often have a headache, or I'm clenched, from just being aware of it. But on those project days and the days where kids are doing, and I'm facilitating, they're doing, and I am facilitating, or I'm their, I guess a facilitator is a good word for it. I'm there as a partner. I'm not leading it. And I leave school on those days. One, I have so many stories I can't wait to get home and talk about. Like, I'm just so energized, and I'm so full of that. Oh, I don't know. It's just magic, really. Like, when learning is going on like that, it's magical. And so it just is it actually has a physical different feel for me.
I completely agree. I think it's, when you're creating that environment, I think it's kind of like trying to reach the top of a plateau. It's exhausting to get there, but once you're at the top, you can just cruise. It's not downhill. It's not easy, but you can kind of just cruise and maintain. I agree. Those days where you're doing more active teaching or traditional teaching, it is exhausting. It's not the same.
It's not joyful.
Right. Yep. That's a great way to put it. So, this may be a little controversial, or some people might take this the wrong way, but as a secondary high school, or I'm sorry, secondary history teacher, social studies teacher, you are I'll put you in the bucket of classes kids have to take. They don't elect to take your class. So how do you engage them? Well, you've talked about how you engage them in that in your student-centered environment, but how do you still excite them about the curriculum that you want to teach, that you're passionate about, that you're required to teach, but also, like I said, take into account the fact that they are not there because they want to learn about the facts that you have to deliver. So how do you kind of play to that system?
I think that in the case of teaching history, it is so imperative now more than ever, Ken, that we help children, that we help kids connect what is going on around them right now to historical education. And I don't think that there's ever been a time it's more obvious that we haven't always done a very good job of teaching historical accuracy and truth. And I don't think we've done a really good job of developing historical empathy as a skill in students. And so I really think that if we approach teaching history, at least, as whether it's elective or not, as a place where we can learn more about ourselves now, more about the world that our learners are navigating now, then there is this really meaningful connection. This is not about history dates or names of people. It's about a real connection to what they see around them. And so that's where I come from about teaching. And I want very much to develop critical thinking skills in my students, historical thinking, thinking like a historian or reading like a historian in my students. That's very, very important to me. So I use a lot of primary sources. I use a lot of different strategies to, like I said, to help develop students' historical empathy and understanding the motives behind perspectives, behaviors, events. And I do a lot of bringing in multi-perspectives. I absolutely know that we have not always done a good job of teaching the full perspective. And I mean, I don't know the full perspective too. So I rely on a lot of other people. I ask a lot of questions. I have friends in different parts of the country who I go to and ask, what am I missing? What do my kids need to know that I have a blind spot to? And so I just think those things are really important. And I think kids, when they start seeing themselves as investigators of history to make sense of the now, I haven't had a lot of, I'm not saying history is going to be their favorite class, but I don't have a problem with keeping kids interested.
I think the way you've talked about involving their own interests, the student-centered environment, and now hearing about the empathy piece, I think I don't think it's a surprise at all that your students are interested in the content. And when I taught fifth grade, I was able to teach all the subjects, so social studies being one of them.
Right.
The biggest message that I tried to display to them is we're learning about people that are exactly the same as you. They just were born in a different year, and they were then forced to experience different things. And always try to take
That's
kind of
great.
that empathetic approach. And I said to them, I'm not worried about you memorizing all the dates. I would joke and say, I'm going to give you some, like I'm going to star some or highlight some or give you these 10 that you should know. And I said, because some of learning social studies is you just want to know it enough that you can talk about it at a party and sound really smart. That's part of learning social studies.
I always tell my kids, I'm like, you do not want to be walking in, California, maybe in Los Angeles one day and some late night TV, show host stops you and asks you a question about basic geography or some date and you have no clue. So there's some hard pass things that we have to these are the couple you got to know. You got to know these things. And I know there's beds of knowledge that we do absolutely need for our students to have. But for the most part, our landscape has changed so dramatically with technology, and rote memorization isn't where it's at when we have the tools that we have now.
Right, and to that point, when you have your kids engaged in the content, they're actually gonna end up remembering more. And even if they don't know the exact year, they're gonna know, the Civil War, that was like in the mid 1800s. I think it started somewhere and then they can say, oh, it was 1860. Those simple things, they'll have a grasp of knowledge to know the relativity of it, but maybe not the exact person, the exact year, the exact town, those types of things. So I could talk on this topic all day, but you said something in your opening that I want to highlight and kind of ask you more about. You said when you came back after being home for a few years with your children, that you found a way to align your head and your heart as a teacher. Can you tell us what that means?
Yeah. Okay. So when I came back into teaching, when I left teaching, it was 1998, and every classroom in my school was getting their own desktop computer connected to the internet. The internet had just been discovered. Or just was being rolled out. And it wasn't discovered, I was being facetious, but it was just being rolled out into public schools in our area. So I leave teaching and I come back in 2015, and my same district, has just adopted a one-to-one device with Chromebooks for every student. And so it was just mind-blowing and the learning curve that I had needed to make very quickly. That kind of occupied my time and attention for a while. But just because you have new technology and new devices, and just because there are these initiatives, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're teaching in a way that is really best for learning and for students. And so I found myself being very, very fortunate on the end of being included in a group from our district that went out to Phoenix to attend an Ed Leader 21 conference, which is all about the 5 C's of learning: collaboration, critical thinking, communication, all of the 5 C's. And so I sat in this auditorium and listened to their keynote speaker, Ted Dintersmith, who wrote the book, What School Could Be. And as I listened to Ted speak about what student-centered learning and is, and how the need for developing these 5 C's in students so that they were future ready, how imperative that was, and how schools could be different than this traditional thing that we've been a part of for so long. I was mesmerized because I knew, because of my son Stephen and filmmaking, and because of my son John and Michael, who started a t-shirt company in high school. I knew that the real learning happens when kids are solving real world problems that matter to them, and that the skills that they end up developing and learning are so much bigger and greater and vast than anything that we give them in a traditional mode of teacher-directed worksheets, this checklist of things that every single one has to do the same. And I knew assessment practices were so skewed also. And so when I went to this conference and went to the sessions, I was like, I can't even explain to you what this was like for me. It was like this, do you know in the movie Dinosaur, when the meteor hits hits the planet, and there's like the sound wave thing that reverberates. All the animals feel it. Well, that's what this was like for me. It was like a sound wave reverberating, like this huge epiphany happened. And so it started my quest into, I want to know everything I can about what 21st century learning looks like. This idea of being future ready, and what kinds of learning experiences can I facilitate to make that happen. That's what I mean about my head and heart being aligned. And it set me off professionally in a way that I never ever, I joined Twitter, Ken, specifically because I wanted to follow Ted Dintersmith and other people that I had learned about at the conference, and authors and experts, Tony Wagner, Ken Kay, these people that I just was mesmerized with from the conference. That's why I joined Twitter. And that in itself has been the most prolific, profound, professional development for me ever. And so since then, it kind of just lit my world up. And I've been able to really pursue, and more than pursue passions, identify them. And find partners and collaboration along the way. So it's been really interesting. So that's what I mean when I say head and heart. And I don't have all the answers. I just keep striving to kind of develop more.
That's great. That's not what I thought, but it's better than what I thought. And
that's interesting.
It's just, I love hosting this podcast because I've had the pleasure of speaking to so many educators like yourself that are just so passionate, and you at times you don't realize how many great, passionate, just fire lit educators there are, because you might not see it all the time where you're at. And that's why I started this podcast, because I just want more teachers to hear how many great teachers there are, and pick up a couple strategies, learn a couple things from you, or even just be reassured that what they're doing does matter and does have a positive impact. So I really just love everything you're sharing. It's really inspirational.
Thank you so much.
I could talk much longer with you, but I want to respect your time and our listeners' time. So I do want to transition into our lesson lens to kind of learn about something specific that maybe you've done with your students in the past. So these are just questions to learn about that activity. So the first question, is it a unit overview, a single lesson, or a long-term project that you're going to share with us?
Well, I just want to share an experience, a lesson or a project that I helped facilitate last year.
Okay.
That was really pretty changed. Like it was, for me as a teacher, it was life-changing.
Awesome. I can't wait to hear it. So first bit of information, what is the grade level? I think we know the subject area, but you can be more specific. Sure. And if there was a particular time of year that you felt it would be best to facilitate it.
So this really dovetails beautifully with the things that we've talked about, and in almost every way, because we've talked a little bit about teachers being willing to get out of their comfort zone a little bit, try something new. We opened this whole entire segment talking about teacher advocacy for themselves, for our profession. And so one of those things is professional development that you can do, right? And I had the opportunity this past spring to be part of a cohort in Virginia that was doing kind of a deep dive into inquiry design model lessons. So like C3 teachers, IDM, that's what it's called. So I partnered with 3 other U.S. history teachers in Virginia, and we were assigned a civic action project to carry out with our students. So I used this with my 6th graders, and the way that it connected to U.S. history, in 6th grade we teach up to the Civil War, and one of the topics that we cover are reformers, okay, and social movement, okay, reform movements. And so it was about taking action. And this compelling question was, how can I make a change? And so at sixth grade, especially you having taught fifth grade, you know that there are some sixth graders that are going to have an awareness. They're in an environment maybe with a family that is very socially aware or civic, aware. But many kids do not. They just not sure what passion they would have in that or interest. So we had to do that. So I centered this around, I used the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 SDGs, as a place to start and the framework to begin letting students explore, what interests you? Is it, they had to identify either a problem or a topic that they wanted to make change in. And so it was very interesting. I had kids do pollution. One student came to me and said, it's not it is land pollution, water pollution, but specifically I want to do my project on PPE pollution during the pandemic, the masks, the gloves. Okay, I thought that was so interesting. I had a couple kids want to do access to health care, sixth graders, in a rural community. And so they started looking at what kinds of free clinics are available to people. That was what they wanted to raise awareness about. I had a few students decide to do it on the LGBTQ community. And they wanted to raise awareness about this. And one of those students messaged me and said, Ms. French, I was just in our library. She was an avid reader. I was just in our library at school, and I looked up LGBTQ themed books or main characters, and we only have one. I think that should be my project. I think I should see about getting books donated. So this is the project and again, Ken, this is something where we were all using the same structure and the same requirements for the project, but students had a lot of agency and autonomy in how they wanted to take this. And absolutely was blown away. I was blown away by the information and the learning and the passion that were revealed in this process. So I don't know what your next question is, but there's that.
I mean, you described that really well. There was what are the objectives? We already hit on that. So I do have a few more that I want to ask you and just say that, when you think about your objectives that you have about learning about advocacy and social change that you were learning about in history, they might not be learning about the exact facts that were from that time period, but they're learning about what a movement like that requires and what's at stake and how you put it together. And so they have a much deeper, higher level understanding of that. And I can tell from the different things that you shared today throughout the podcast that higher level thinking is accessed very often in your class by your students because of the environment that you're creating with them. And I think that's really important to highlight. So maybe you can just speak to, you've kind of talked about a little bit more, but is there anything that you can add in terms of what the students were actively doing during the lesson, maybe to access the information or research or what have you?
Yeah, this was an evidence-based, research-based project. And what I evaluated from them, what the summative was an actual written statement of what their topic was, how they researched it, specifically how they planned, what their plan was to make a change, what challenges or obstacles they might face in pursuing that change and in implementing that action. And so this project, and that's why I'm specifically wanted to talk about inquiry design model or inquiry-based learning experiences, because it really infuses all those things you and I have been talking about today, which is student engagement. It amps student engagement. It amps critical thinking skills, and it arms students with so much knowledge and skill building for future learning experiences, right? There's a lot of cross-transfer and transfer skills that are so important to build in our kids, much more than just a learning target or fact, right? It's that skill development. And so my kids worked on research. They worked on writing skills, and they worked on planning, the organization of being able to carry out something.
Perfect. So the next question is, what was your role to ensure the student's success during the lesson? And I want to add to this. We know, especially after this conversation today, we know you were facilitating. So I want you to try to dive a little bit deeper.
Right.
What does good facilitating look like that you were doing to ensure the success of the students?
Oh, well, I felt like I was on speed. I was on speed, like, okay, like next, come over here. Like, let's look at, help find sites. Where can we go? Because there's always a lot when you don't have a scripted, lesson with, there's a lot of problem solving and problem shooting that has to, troubleshooting that has to go on in the moment. And so it can look a little harried and a little, I was meeting with kids, so a class time was never enough to get to 20 some kids. So kids were meeting me at lunchtime. They were coming in before school. Last year, because of the pandemic, we worked Monday through Thursday, and Friday was our off day. I had kids getting permission to have them come in to work with me on Fridays. They want on their own. I wasn't asking them to. I just said, I'm here if you want to. I met with kids in Zoom meetings outside during my lunchtime that were home, virtual learners. So I think facilitating isn't just like, here's the lesson, this is what we're doing, and I'm going to show you slides and help chunk this project for you, which I did. It's also like on the ground trying to navigate through some of these, and there were dead ends. It was difficult. There were moments. And I'll tell you that one of the biggest obstacles that I ran into was my students created action posters, right? They could do a food drive. They could do the book thing, donation, whatever it was. But I had students also want to create like informational posters about their topic. And I had asked permission in our district that those be displayed, or in my building, and the principal was fine. But it wasn't fine actually when I gave the posters to the principal to look at beforehand. The topic of LGBTQ, the topic of some of the things was problematic for the principal. And they didn't necessarily decide, they didn't display any of the posters after all the work that was done. A poster by an 11-year-old that the principal felt would be too much for a 10-year-old, even though all that was said on it was a statement of make schools a safe space, love is love. And so that's something real that happened, that was very hard to accept, was very hard to talk with the student about it after they had worked so hard. But it's real. And that's in a lot of communities, school communities and buildings. It's unfortunate. But when I say, and this, I don't know what everyone's going to feel about this, but I do really believe it, that as teachers and as building leaders, we have to at least be as courageous as our students that we serve.
I couldn't agree more. That's a perfect way of saying it. And I think it's incredibly unfortunate that your student experienced that, but also, one, relates great to your content because clearly people were faced with that throughout history, but also I think it's beneficial that the student experienced it with you having their back and in a safe place. We've talked a lot on this show about force your kids to take risks and make mistakes when it's free, when it's
right.
safe.
Oh yeah, right. So true.
Now that student hopefully can recognize, that it might happen again, but it's not a reason to stop. Or, is there something that they could do a little bit differently, or can they just bypass the principal and make a website and share with the world if they want to? There's a lot of different things that they could do, and they could learn from that. So it's unfortunate for students to experience that, but I also think it's important for them to experience real things. And like you said, it's real life. There's no changing that.
I just think that a lot of our attention, and rightly so, is about diversity, inclusion, and equity work right now. And I think that again, we absolutely, it is time for that work, but it can't just be something you talk about. And it also, I believe that it absolutely is connected to history education. And there has to be, at the same time, a really, an emphasis put on teaching accurate and truthful history. And so,
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So the last question, what is advice you have for yourself to maybe improve this or take this project to the next level?
I don't know, the first time you run through something, I've never done this particular project before. So the first time you run through something, there's always takeaways that you would, look back and think, how could I tighten this up? What support could I have brought in, maybe more different, so that it wasn't just me trying to help the students find resources or, do some of that. So I think like that's those kinds of things I would definitely look at and think about how I could support kids more throughout the project.
I agree. I found,
and timeline even.
Yep, I've found with projects like that, you talked about you're trying to help the students and you also want them to know like what are the next steps or the next chunks. And a lot of times you don't know what those next chunks are until you go through the whole process the first time. So two things that I always like to do after a big project or a unit like that is try to figure out, is there like a basic navigation, and can I create a screencast that like starts the next level? So when a student is ready for the next step and 20 others are not, you can say, hey, go watch that screencast. That'll get you started on the next step.
Right.
And also
Smart.
You find yourself asking very common questions throughout the process. So I always try to like, what are those 8 really important questions that I'm asking, and write those down to make sure that I am provoking those questions with students. I completely agree. It's just like a reflection time to think about, where did we go? Was there a shorter path, a better path? That kind of stuff.
No, those are really good, 2 really good tips.
Thank you.
That would save a lot of it would just streamline things better and provide better support.
For sure. So our last section of the show is called the exit ticket, and it is the same 4 questions we ask every guest every week. So question number 1, what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
I just think a teacher getting to know a student, like lighting up when they see them, knowing them, like taking time to warmly connect with a student. I know that sounds kind of cringy, but I really mean it. I mean, I just think like when a kid looks at your face, they know if you genuinely are happy and want to be with them. And I think that's such a basic thing, but it is something that can transform a kid's day and yours.
Absolutely. You talked in the beginning of the show about, I don't think you need to be a parent to be a great teacher, and I completely agree. But you also did talk about, what home life is like, the mornings or their after school, and I think it's important for everyone to remember that and recognize that, and just what you're saying now, that warm smile might be the first warm smile they see the entire day. And if you do that every day, you can ensure that they're getting that smile every day.
Yes. And operating out of when I coach new teachers online, and I've done this for about 3 years. And I always talk to them about compassion and really operating like that's your mindset, is one of compassion for your students. So if a student falls asleep in your class, that you're not taking that you're not taking it personally. You're not being offended by that. You're looking at it like that kid needs to sleep or what is going on with that kid that they're not getting the rest that they need. That you operate not out of you're going to catch them or get them. It's out of compassion.
I like to always say, approach every situation with empathy first. Figure out why. Why is that student sleeping? And then you can talk to them about appropriate times to sleep, but still figure out why first. The next question, what is the best advice you've ever received, whether it be from a colleague, a supervisor, or even a student?
Best advice. I think that some of the best advice, it's the hardest, is it kind of connects to that whole idea of wait time. but a teacher not filling the silence, not rescuing. You know, as a parent, you have to learn that, and it's so hard, especially in the years you're in right now, Ken, because you're all about accident proof, right? I mean, you're mitigating kids like falling downstairs constantly or choking. I know. And so it's hard to get out of that mentality. But that every time we intervene, in a lot of ways, we deny students, but our children, the opportunity to stumble and then get themselves together and learn. It's part of the learning process. And if we intervene on that, then we are stunting that. And they're going to have to figure it out sometime.
You're right. It's really difficult. It's really difficult as a teacher, because you want to feel like you're facilitating a classroom that's always successful, but truly to be successful, you have to let the kids stumble and fall, like you said.
I mean, how many times do we have to practice tying a shoe, or you know, watching a baby learn to use the pincher grip to get that Cheerio for it's all over the place at first, but they have to do that to learn. And I know that's reducing learning experiences to very simplistic things, but you don't ever test your kid on tying a shoe. You don't test them. It's not, they're not doing it because of an assessment or because you're holding something over them or because it's this, you know, whatever. It's something that happens naturally, and it's developmental, and learning is very much the same way.
Yeah, I completely agree. And there's nothing better than watching kids learn that way, and then, you know, reflecting as a teacher, how do I create that same experience in the classroom? So the school year goes in waves. We have very stressful times. It's normally circled around report cards, conferences, you know, all those times of the year. So in those moments where teachers are feeling the burden and the pressure, what is something that you would want to say to them to power up in that moment?
I think that obviously self-care is really important, and a balance is just really vital. But I think that in those moments, yeah, I do. I think you have to be really intentional about self-care and about kind of compartmentalizing your life a little bit. And I'm not good at it. I struggle with that. My family would tell you that for sure. But it's so important to balance, because as educators, we pour out so much. There's so much pouring out, and that if you don't along the way do a pretty good job of retaining some time, energy, and joy in yourself and in the outside of school life, that we are at risk not only of burnout, but of a lot of other negative things happening, simply to counteract that constant pouring out. And so it requires some intentionality and reserving your reserves.
It does. You're absolutely right. It is the business of pouring out, but you have to find ways to pour it back to yourself, or, like you said, reservoirs, those types of things. So last question is very easy. How can our audience connect more with you after listening to today's podcast?
I'm really just on Twitter. I mean, I have an Instagram and whatever, but I don't really mess with that either. Like you said, I don't do a lot of social media besides being like teacher Twitter stuff. So it's you can find me on Twitter at awfrench1. That's it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We will link to Abby's social media handle in our show notes page, which can be found at powereduup.com/show35. Abby, thank you so much. This has been a blast. I've really enjoyed meeting you today and connecting with you and talking about our teaching styles and the way you're creating and facilitating learning environments. It's very evident that your students, your colleagues, and everyone involved in your education community is super lucky to have you as a part of their learning experiences, and I know you'll continue to help advocate for education and help students grow. So thank you, everyone, for listening. As always, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our podcast on whatever platform you are listening on, as well as YouTube. Please share this with other educators. It is not about sharing it for me. It's about sharing it for educators to hear the stories and the strategies and the ideas that we hear every week, especially from an amazing educator like Abby. So thank you everyone so much. Have a great week, and make sure you do take time for yourself as well after you put together some killer student-centered lessons. So we will end this episode. This is normally Matt's part, but I'll do my best here. As we power down this episode, we absolutely know we left you feeling powered up. Thanks again, Abby.
Thank you so much.